The Instructor Podcast with Terry Cook, talking with leaders, innovators, experts and game changers about what drives them.
Welcome to the Instructor Podcast. As always, I am your splendid host, Terry Cook, and I am delighted to be here and even more delighted that you have chosen to listen. If you are a regular listener, welcome back. And if you are listening for the first time, welcome on board. This is a show where I speak to experts, leaders, innovators, and game changers to give you information and inspiration to help you become an even more awesome driving instructor. And today is no different. We have plenty of information and inspiration for you. There is a slight difference though, because today I am delving into my back catalogue of the premium content and pulling out one of my favourite episodes from the standards checklist and giving that to you today for public consumption. I've decided to do this once a season. There's over 60 exclusive episodes over there, and today I am giving you one of the standards checklists that we run. That is the show where we dive deep into one of the competencies on that standards check to give you a better understanding of it and help prepare you A, to pass your standards check, and B, to deliver even better driving lessons. And today I am joined by the awesome Emma Cottington, who shares some delightful knowledge and makes me look at things in a slightly different way. But just before we dive into the show, I want to give you a little nudge to go and give the show a subscribe. Wherever you're listening, whether it's Apple, Spotify, whatever, go and click subscribe so it drops into your feed every time we release a new episode. And once you've clicked subscribe, share it. Share it with your friends, share it in WhatsApp groups, share it with your local associations, share it on social media, wherever you can. I'm all for you guys sharing it. And if you're feeling extra nice, make sure you leave me a little 5-star review. You can do that on Apple, you can do it on Spotify, you can do it on Facebook or Google, anywhere you want. And speaking of 5-star reviews, if you hang about till the end of the show, you will catch another couple of my favourites over there. People that have left reviews, and I'll be reading them out at the end of the show. But for now, let's get struck into the Instructor Podcast. So welcome to the 7th edition of the Standards Checklist, and we are currently continuing through the risk management section, and today I'm going to be looking at, was the trainer aware of the surroundings and the pupils' actions? And, as always, it's not just me, I'm joined by someone who is an expert and an all-around decent human being in Emma Cottington. How are we doing, Emma?
Hello. I don't know about decent, Terry, but I'm here. But yes, thanks for having me once again. It's a privilege.
No, it's great to have you on. These are one of my favourite shows to record, I think, because these are ones that I often get, I don't know what the term is, maybe corrected on, because it's not my forte. You know, I keep thinking about it, but I've genuinely no interest in training people to become an instructor. It doesn't appeal to me. I like my learners. I like my business. I don't like that bit. I like doing this side of it. I like the talking to people, interviewing. I like coaching them in different ways. Anyway, I'm going on a tangent. But when I do this, I love it because A, it helps me, obviously, but B, I get to find out all these awesome different takes from other people. And I'm trying to get someone different on every show. So it's great to have you on. And thank you for answering the call.
Thank you. Thanks for the invite.
So, as I said, I'm talking about, was the trainer aware of the surroundings and the pupils' actions? Now, I would say if I was picking a competency that I probably knew the least about in terms of how it's assessed or how you would train it or anything, it's probably this one. So you've come
brilliant.
to probably quite a good one, because I'm going to have some dumb questions for you potentially. But before we dive into it, let me ask you, what are your thoughts on the standards check overall?
I'm a massive advocate for it, if I'm honest. Being an instructor that's come from check test era and having to come into standards check, so having to change. I'd only been an instructor for, I want to say 5 years when it changed to the new standards check way from check test way. So I kind of felt like I was just getting into it, finding my feet, finding my flow properly, and, you know, really feeling like I was doing my job and knowing exactly what I needed to do and all the rest of it. And then it changed. I was like, great, okay, what do I do with this now? But I'm a massive advocate for this new way, because I think it really dives into our skill set as an instructor, what service we should be providing, and really transforms the way that we train somebody. And that's not necessarily coming from, obviously we're talking about driver training right now and learner drivers and how we do our job with regards to the standards check, but I'm a massive believer that learning does come from the person that's being taught. And I think this standards check kind of really brings out those coaching skills that allow us to delve into the person that's being taught something and allow them to find that learning from within them. And we're just basically there to allow that to happen and, facilitate that to happen. Whereas the old way was very much teacher student, you do as I say, and copycat or what have you, and I'll tell you when something's going wrong and then I'll tell you how to fix it. But I don't believe that works, not long term anyway. So yeah, massive advocate for it.
It's interesting you speak about it like that, because when I first kind of come across the client-centered learning approach, the coaching approach, I did turn my nose up a little bit, and I was like, well, we're instructors, we don't coach, and we don't, and then I kind of had it explained to me what it was, and I was like, oh, that's kind of what I do already.
Yeah, it's a mix, isn't it, of both? It really is. Mm-hmm.
There's times you need to tell people stuff, i.e. don't crash into that bus, which ties into what we're talking about today.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And there's times when we can ask them and so on. But yeah, I it's a phrase that I find quite cheesy, but as you said it, and I think it's right, we get the learning out. I do. Absolutely. I think that's spot on. All right, so the first big question I like to ask everyone around the standards check specifically, and we were kind of touched on this before we started talking, actually, is it's one of the things we see people stress about the most. It's who to take on the standards check. So, if you had someone come to ask you about who should I take, what would your answer be?
I think my biggest thing here, and I think this kind of comes from a perspective of, obviously we get a varied amount of different people come to us for what we do. You have different people sitting in that car every single day. But for me, this question comes down to one of the essential coaching skills. I'm a true believer that if we don't have rapport with somebody, we can't do, no matter how good we are at our job, if you haven't built that rapport with somebody else, then you can't do your job effectively, I don't believe. And we're not going to have rapport with everybody. We're human. We don't get on with everybody. So there's going to be some that are more difficult than others because you can't build the rapport as well as what you could do with other people. So for me, I would be looking to do this with somebody who is got a bit of a rapport that'll kind of bounce with me, somebody who's willing to answer the questions when they come, and also equally that's not scared of asking you questions either. They're not feared of approaching you because they've got that rapport with you, that they feel comfortable to say, I don't know what you're talking about, or I'm not getting this, or whatever it might be. So for me, it's somebody who's engaging, and just from a personal perspective, somebody who doesn't take themselves too seriously, really. Like, I think I just connect with those type of people anyway, that don't take themselves too seriously and bit of a, quite happy to have a bit of a laugh with it and, keep the serious undertone of what we're doing and what we're trying to achieve, but in a fun and sort of light way, really. So I'd be looking for that, because that not only is good for your student, but I think when I'm under the test conditions myself of a standards check, that would relax me too. So I'd be looking for somebody who not only I'm helping, but who's going to help me in that situation too, so that my stress levels can come down.
I think, I could be wrong, but I think you're the first person to mention rapport in regards to this question. And it really resonates. I think you're bob on. I always think back to the old style part 3 that I took, and I passed second time. I've probably told this before, but the first time I didn't feel like I had that rapport with the examiner, and she wasn't doing anything wrong at all. She was literally just doing a job, but she was very formal. And I just did not feel at ease for the entire test. Now, that's not why I failed. I failed because I wasn't good enough on the day. But it didn't help me. However, the second examiner I got was amazing. I can remember it pretty clearly. We came out. I think I said something about the test, and she's like, "Oh, we'll speak about that in a minute. How's your day?" And straight away, I'm relaxed, and we're walking up to the car, and we're only when we got in car, we're talking about test, and like when we switched, I can't remember what it's called, but we did like half of one test and half of the other. And she goes, "If you want to get out for a minute and stretch your legs, you can do." I'm like, "Actually, yes, that would be awesome."
Please.
Exactly, and that rapport, and I think that's an underrated skill with students. Sometimes I think we're very quick to look at them and be like, "Well, you've said something that's annoying me, or you've texted me a question mark. How dare you text me a question mark? We're no longer doing lessons." Rather than let's have a try. Anyway, that's a whole other episode. But yeah, good shout. I like that. So let's move on to this competency, and this one in particular. So it comes under the risk management bracket. Was the trainer aware of the surroundings and the pupils' actions? So do you just want to give me your initial take on that, kind of what it means, how you've interpreted that side of it?
Yeah. I think for me, out of the risk management section on the competencies, I think this one's actually the main one. I think it for me it is anyway. That's my sort of interpretation, and it's kind of one of the things that I use in my training. Because for me, this one is managing the risk outside and inside your car. And you've got those two sets of risks to manage, what's going on outside, but also what's going on inside. And I think sometimes, particularly with PDIs, we become very focused on what's going on outside the car as being our main risk, which is fine because there's a lot of variables going on outside there and a lot of people that we can't have any sort of control over in any way. But I do feel that we've got a huge risk management with our student as well. And again, it comes down to those skills of having that rapport. Again, I'm going to go back to that word, because by having that, you're able to read body language, you're able to hear the tone. So when they're saying something but meaning something else, that for me is all risk management. Because if that person's melting at the side of you and you're not aware of it, and you're just listening to the fact that they're going, yeah, we're fine, but you actually know they're really not fine, that's risk management. And that's what this question means to me, especially obviously the pupils' actions. I think a lot of people come with the perception that pupils' actions mean how they respond to the surroundings, which it does, but I like to look a little bit deeper. Pupils' actions for me is how they're presenting themselves as well at the time. What's their body language like? What's their tone of voice like? Are they sweating by now? Things like that. I think that for me comes under pupils' actions as well as how they're responding to the road ahead. So yeah, I think for me it's the main thing with regards to risk management, because we need to interpret the pupil, and we also need to be the driver from the passenger seat when it comes to this question. You need to be fully aware of what's going on around you, so that you can be as proactive as possible with your student rather than being reactive, because there isn't a lot of time for reactive behaviour from an instructor if there's something going on that needs that response. You need to be able to deliver that to your student as quickly as possible, really.
Well, if you consider this like the main one within mismanagement, I've definitely got you on the right episode, haven't I? So that's good. I won't even plan that way. You've said a lot of things there that I want to touch back on. I think there's some key ones, and I think one of the first ones, and it kind of says it in it itself, but it's where we're looking. You spoke about, I think you mentioned about we can find ourselves looking ahead too much rather than at the student. It's something that I found myself doing. I think it was, if I'm being honest, a bit of complacency, a bit of laziness, when I'd first passed, a bit like, oh, passed now, I can relax. Yeah. And one of the things I did, and this turned out to be a bad idea, but to make myself look at the students was I'd put I'm doing this on video so people won't see, but I put my right arm almost behind their seat so it was holding the back seat, in the back seat. which would make me twist round to face them a little bit. And it got me back into the habit properly because it physically made me do it, look at them and pay attention to them. And I would have to physically look to twist the other way, which I thought was a great idea until I needed to grab the wheel one time. And my hands all the way back in the car.
I can't imagine it was great for your back and your shoulders either.
No, oddly enough. But is that, do you think one of the common problems around that is that the instructors do find themselves looking ahead too much and not paying enough attention on the student?
Yeah, I think like one of the words that you used there, complacency. I think we can become complacent, especially if you've got a learner driver who, let's say, is test ready. Test's coming up in a couple of weeks. You're looking far ahead. You're spotting these things that's happening on the road ahead, whatever the hazard might be, or the situation that you feel is going to need some risk management from this learner driver. And I think we can then become a little bit complacent of not looking at them or expect an expectation that, well, they can handle this. They've handled this before, or they're coming up for the test. They should be able to handle this or whatever. And then kind of not reading them in the situation. So not noticing that they've not started to check the mirrors. So therefore, have they spotted what this hazard is? There's no response from them even coming off the gas to even remotely start to slow down for whatever it might be. And I think we can become a little bit complacent to notice the what they're doing, the body language, whether they're looking in the mirrors. Basically, are they following their MSPSL routine or whatever routine that you would be looking for them at that point? And I think when we get into that complacency, and we'll probably be on those hazards straight away. We're a driver, so you're responding to those things, but are you responding to them in enough time to get something back from your learner driver to notice what they're doing as well? Because then we've got to start thinking about what level of intervention we're going to need to bring into this, if any. And for me, I'm a huge advocate that we should be avoiding physical intervention unless we really, really need it. For me, you've got sort of two verbal interventions before you get to that. You've got your call to action of, what are you going to do with this? Have you spotted this? How are you going to deal with this? What have you? And then you've got you need to come off the gas, you need to get on your brake or whatever. But if we respond late to our student not responding, you're now into a reactive situation rather than a proactive situation. And beyond risk management, which I know this is what this competency is all about in this sort of conversation, but beyond that, for me, that destroys a little bit of your rapport with your learner driver, because now they're feeling a bit crappy because they've not dealt with the situation that could have probably been avoided from getting to that point if we'd have responded well as the instructor. They've now lost a little bit of confidence in themselves and probably a little bit of confidence in you as well. And then you've got to build that back up again. So you're kind of going back round again. And I'm not saying that things aren't going to be reactive sometimes. There's always going to be something that surprises us. There's always going to be somebody who does something that none of us was expecting. That's just the way of the road, unfortunately. But a lot of the time we can avoid getting to that point that it's reactive and a physical intervention, I think.
Do you think instructors, from your experience, obviously, are good at spotting the obvious stuff? So when we're saying we're going to take the next road on the left, you're good at, because you're giving a direction, you're good at looking ahead, checking your surroundings, and then looking at the student. But perhaps when there's stuff that you're not giving a direction for, something that's just occurring, you're more likely to miss that. For example, you come to your traffic lights, you've stopped, they've left it in third, there's a car behind, you're either not paying attention, don't notice the car behind, or you're not paying attention, don't notice it's in third. But when you give the direction, you're then actively doing it. Do you think that's more likely to happen?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, it's quite interesting that you put it that way, actually, because I don't think I've ever kind of thought about it that way. I probably have, but in a different way. But Yeah, I think there's things that's more obvious to us to give direction for, and then there's things that's going to be less obvious to give direction for. And I think if we're getting to that point where it's it's less likely, I think we become more reliant on them to do what they need to do, and they might not do it the way we would expect or the way we would do. And therefore, then you're running the risk then that things are going to then start to break down between the two of you, and obviously then the element of risk to everybody involved, you and the other road users, depending on what it is. So yeah, I would say so. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting. Again, you mentioned that the sort of a breakdown of rapport, and I'll use that example again of trying to start off in third gear. That if a student does that and you don't notice it, and there's a car behind, and then they stall, we don't know what's going on in their head at that point. Their immediate thought could be, "Why have you let me do that?" No, you ask any student, the worst thing they can do in the world is stalling. They hate it. It's that embarrassing thing, and you've almost just put them in that situation to a degree. So I think that's interesting. I'd never kind of connected the two of this particular competency and having an effect on rapport. So that's interesting for me. And I want to just step back slightly, because with these standards checklists, the idea is to give people, a good idea and ways to teach, within, what's expected from the DVSA. But we are also looking specifically at the standard check. And I suppose the other key thing there about where you're looking, if you're on a standards check and the examiner's sat in the back, they're watching you. So they're going to be watching to see if you're looking at that student. So even specific on a test, we need to be doing it, don't we? And letting them see we're doing that, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, part of the question is the pupil's actions. That bottom, was the trainer aware of the surroundings and the pupil's actions? And I think sometimes that's translated as the pupil's actions to the surroundings. Well, actually, part of it is, but for me, it's also a separate thing. It's the pupil's actions just broadly on their own, and how that's then going to affect the surroundings. So it's not necessarily their actions in response to the surroundings, but how their actions are going to affect the surroundings as well. And your example of being in third gear, moving away from traffic lights, is a key example of that. That wasn't the pupil's response to the surroundings. That was your pupil's actions affecting the surroundings. So I think definitely from the DVSA and examiner perspective on a standards check, as much as they've not probably got a great view of the student, they're aware of what that student's doing. They're well trained for these things. And, they will be looking at how you deal with those situations and from a risk management point of view, how you go about intervening with that. And then looking at the intervention side of it, was it client-centered? So stopping at traffic lights and red light and staying in third gear, is your approach to that to either have you not noticed, or was your approach to just leave them and let them stall? Is that very client-centered? Well, probably not, So if that happens, is there a way of dealing with that where you can maybe use your questioning techniques, or maybe you can use your call to action, or you can look at a prompt or something like that will highlight the problem to the student, but allow them to remain in control of it, so that they figure it out, fix it, and then move away from the traffic lights, as you should.
Yeah. I love it when we get a good example that works. Makes it so much easier. But I mean, just on that, you're right in what you say, how are you handling that? And I think, if you're aware of your surroundings, so perhaps whether there's a car behind or not. If there's nothing behind you at all, that's where you could converse with your student a little bit and say, now just think before we set off, whereas if there's a car behind, you might want to be more direct and say, make sure we get it back in first. Yeah. So it all kind of ties in. But you also mentioned about body language and about knowing how your students feeling almost. And I think that's interesting, because that almost takes away a little bit of the looking at them, because we don't always need we can pick up cues without looking directly. Yeah. So with what they're saying, and also you've got your window down, you can hear what's going on outside the car. But the one that stands out for me is, if you're looking ahead, we can see out of the corner of his eye, and you'll see that finger just move underneath the indicator. And you're like,
Yeah.
why are they signaling here?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what are we looking for when it comes to body language then, do you think? And that's quite a broad question, but what are we looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's... Now, I'm going to say this as if it's quite obvious, and I shouldn't really make that generalisation. And I think because for me, looking at this from a lot of people who listen to this might not know this, but alongside what I do here, I'm doing a lot of training with regards to sort of counselling, mindfulness, well-being, and all that type of stuff. And so a lot of my training for body language is in that as well. And I've developed that so much more since I've been doing that side of training as well. But your body language, people connect with your body language before they connect with you as a person. Before you even engage in a conversation, sometimes you can normally tell whether somebody's receptive to having this conversation or they're not, whether they're kind of quite an open and maybe bubbly person, or whether they're quite shy and reserved and they're not going to be forthcoming. But we can also tell when there's a change in body language. And I think that's what's important in this situation, because we get to know our learner drivers reasonably well. So you'll be reading their body language from the moment that you meet them, but we'll be very aware also at the point that changes. And it's knowing that point that there's been a change to then physically find out what that change is and why there's been a change. Because not a lot of them are going to come forward and go, I really don't like this. They're not going to, you're their instructor. And some of them won't have that sort of confidence to say, unless you've built a really good rapport, and in most cases, but you're not going to be able to do it with everybody. But a lot of them won't be forthcoming and say, I don't like this, or I'm not ready for this, or I'm not, it'll come from how they behave instead. That that they're not sort of ready. An example of this, I mean, it's hard to show body language when there's no video, but an example of this for me that really stood out and has always stood out, and I always use it as an example, is I did a briefing one day on town centre roundabouts, and we were chatting away. This student, more than capable to be able to handle this new scenario that we're doing. She'd actually volunteered that's what she wanted to do. That was her goal. And we did a bit of a briefing, found out what she knew, what she didn't know, and all the rest of it, filled in the gaps. And then we come to the end of the conversation. I said, right, okay, are we ready to go then? And she went, yeah. And straight away, I know, well, no, you're not. She said yeah, which she very much meant no. So, I had to delve a little bit deeper and figure out, what was going on for her. And we changed that session around, all from that one little reading of body language.
We're just taking a slight pause in the show to give a big shout out to the latest subscriber to the Instructor Podcast Premium. That is Simon Jenner. By signing up, Simon has got access to almost 70 at the moment exclusive pieces of content for premium subscribers, much like the one you are listening today with the Standards Check Checklist with Emma Cottington. He gets access to all those awesome shows, including the shows by Bob Morton and San Harper and Robin Bates, as well as all the stuff I do individually as well. So big thanks to Simon for signing up. If you would like to get access to all those additional shows, and on top of that, there's at least another free quote every month, usually 5 or 6, you can get access for as little as £10 a month. Just head over to theinstructorpodcast.com and you can check out the premium over there, or you can head to the show notes and click on the links, just take you straight there. For £10 a month, you get access to all that stuff and all the discounts as well for awesome places like Client-Centered Learning and the Guild of Mindful Drivers. But if you don't want any extra content, but you would like to support the show, you can sign up to the £2 tier, where you get absolutely nothing except my eternal gratitude. And you get to support the running of the show by contributing £2 a month, for which I am supremely grateful. So as I mentioned, www.theinstructorpodcast.com. Check out all the premium stuff, as well as all the cool stuff we've got over there, like blogs and collections of shows and all that cool stuff. But for now, let's dive back into this episode with Emma Cottington. It's interesting, and I always think to the one that I like, the one that always makes me happy, and it's when you pull up at the side of the road and they immediately turn to face you. It's like that. That's awesome. You know that they're then keen to engage, they want to talk. Yeah. Then you get the others, of course, you pull up beside the road, they keep their hands on wheel, keep looking ahead, and it's like, right, okay. Do you not want to talk? Do you want to carry on driving? You know, it's interesting. But there's so much more we can pick up on than just the just looking at sort of where they're looking and stuff. That, like you say, just by having that conversation and by keeping an eye on them. But I think the other thing I want to touch on there is how we deal with stuff on the move, because I think that this plays into it largely in that, you know, so we're surroundings and with the actions are obviously monitoring that, but how do we deal with stuff? So like you said, if you've noticed your student hasn't checked the mirrors when they're coming towards the roundabout, how do we deal with that? Have we got enough time to question them? Or do we need to jump straight in with something being a bit more direct? And I do sometimes still struggle with that now, because I think they haven't checked the mirrors. How long am I going to wait until they haven't checked them? Do you know, what's the last possible point I can say something? And even now I'll misjudge it sometimes. Oh, should have said something earlier. And then you kind of got to jump in with an action. But not everyone's great at answering questions on the move, are they? I mean, I'm just going to throw a quick example of one of my students. And to give you sort of an idea of this student, she judges the quality of a lesson by how much she's cried. Yeah. And we kind of talk about it every lesson. It's more for my sake than hers, if I'm being honest. Just like, am I okay to ask you? And she's like, don't ask me anything while I'm driving. Don't ask me anything. Tell me. And then when we're talking, I'll pull up. And I'm like, okay, cool. And that works for us. Won't work for everyone, but what were your overall thoughts on that, about how we would use those instructions on the move, in accordance to how they feel? This, you get what I'm asking you there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this for me relates more to the sort of top section of the standards check sheet under the lesson planning, because what we're trying to balance is the lesson plan that you've got, the goal, and what expectation the pupil has set, and your part in that, their part in that, and all the rest of it. And then when that becomes a risk, at what point does that go from lesson planning to risk? And I think what I mean by that is, so for example, if your student's goal in this respect was roundabouts that we've mentioned, and they said at the beginning their goal was to do a roundabout completely by themselves, they wanted to do it independent, and they wanted to achieve exiting first left. That was their goal. So for me, that's their goal, exiting the roundabout first left. Now, your learning goals and needs, so their needs as well, you've got to kind of bring that in. But if their goal is to do that independently, then you've got to balance out your level of instruction now is to leave them to do that independently. You're not guiding them, you're not prompting them, there's nothing in there for that, because that's not what they want. You've also got a level of risk to sort of deal with as well. So if you've got a pupil that's then coming up to this roundabout and you know they need to move into this left-hand lane and they've not checked the mirrors yet to see that that's clear, from my perspective, and this is just my opinion, I would be, of course, looking in the surroundings myself, checking the mirrors myself, so that if they move over without this mirror check, that we're going to be safe, it's going to be okay. I would actually let them complete the manoeuvre unless it was a risk. So if I then check the mirror and there's a cyclist there and they've not done it, I'm going to intervene at that point. What I would then be doing is letting them complete the roundabout. Once we're safely off the roundabout, I would then be asking for their reflection on how they felt that went. If we work down the routine, did you do your mirrors? Did you do your signal? Did you, how would you assess yourself on this? And then I'd wait for their response to see what their response is. And if they're fully aware of the fact that they've missed the mirror, I'd then be having a conversation of, well, why do you feel you missed it? What are the risks of that? So I would only actually intervene on the approach to that roundabout if it becomes a risk management problem. there's an actual risk.
I think that's a really good example, actually. A really good example of two things. Firstly, how a lot of this blends together on the standards check, and they're all kind of connected. But also of how things can be interpreted, because, I'm trying to put, obviously I'm not a standards check examiner or enforcement officer, whatever they're called nowadays, but sort of trying to think from their perspective. If that had happened on your standards check, and you've agreed that beforehand, that level of instruction, so you'll do it independently. Well, you've just got your ticks for that. You've got your marks for that section. If you then go on and you don't notice a car or something in your surroundings that you don't notice, you're getting marked down for that. Yeah. If you notice it but don't notice that your student hasn't noticed it, and then that causes a problem, again, you're getting marked down for that. But if you do it like you've said, which is you've noticed it, you've watched your student, you've seen they haven't noticed it, but it hasn't caused a problem, and then you've addressed it afterwards, well, then you're ticking every box. Yeah, and I think that's a really good example of how to look at it, just how it all blends together, which I think is great. And I think kind of sort of looking to sort of find a few points on this, because I think this is where a commentary drive comes in useful. Now, I know that when your students learn, they aren't learning this topic. This topic is for us as instructors. But I think this is brilliant for us in this sort of section, because we really get to see where they're looking. Is that something you would advise? Or?
Yeah, I absolutely love commentary driving. I absolutely love it. I mean, again, it depends on your student as to what you're going to get, their interpretation of it and things like that. But commentary driving really does give us... it gives us an insight into not only what they're looking at, but how they're processing it. I'm a huge advocate for thoughts and feelings. As a human, everything that we do is based on our thoughts and feelings. Our actions all come from that base. And I think when you look at commentary driving, you're looking at, or you're assessing what they're looking at and how far ahead they're looking and seeing these things. But we're also going to tap into a little bit on how they're feeling about it, because they'll organise things in order of sort of priority, their priority. And that normally comes from a thoughts and feelings basis of whether it's something that they don't particularly like dealing with normally, or if it's something that they find really relatively easy to deal with. And a lot of it comes from a thought. Sometimes you can run the same route with the same sort of hazards that'll pop up with two different people and they'll respond in completely different ways. But it'll all depend on their thoughts and feelings around that certain issue. Parked cars is a key example of it. Some people hate having to stop to let somebody else come through because of a parked car. They can't judge the space. They don't know the distance. They don't know where to stop. So their spotting of hazards on a commentary drive will all be about parked cars normally, because they hate it, so they're focused on it. Or there'll be a complete avoidance of it. It'll be the opposite. It'll be one or the other. But you can normally sort of tell. Whereas somebody who is dealing with parked cars generally in a really well way, and they've never really had too much of a problem with it, won't tend to tap into it. They'll concentrate on other hazards and things because they'll deal with that as if it's not a hazard, because they just sort of flow with it in their driving. They just deal with it and it's been fine for them. It's never been a problem. So thoughts and feelings come massively into commentary driving, and it's fascinating to watch.
Yeah. The one that always makes me chuckle is, it's technically commentary driving, but I sometimes like to ask the really vague question of what can we see up ahead? Because I'm always fascinated by the first thing they say. And there's always someone that will say a pigeon. They won't see the roundabout, they won't see the signs, but they'll see the pigeon.
Yeah.
Yeah,
miss the pedestrian that's just stepped out in front of them, but seen the pigeon. Yeah. Or the dogs are normally a good one. Oh, did you see that dog? I'm actually watching the pedestrian crossing change to red, but
it's normally me with the dogs. I've been known to get out of the car sometimes when a dog's been walking past. Just hang fire a minute. I'm just off to say hello. Okay, cool. Is there anything else you want to touch on regarding this particular competency while we're talking?
I don't think so. I think the only one, I think it kind of comes back to something that you said before that kind of was a bit of a light bulb. Well, not a light bulb, but something kind of come up for me was when it comes to this, a lot of this is about timing as well. And that kind of comes into one of your other risk competencies as well. Because if we're not aware of our surroundings in good time, we can't possibly instruct, coach, teach, whichever way you want to look at this, enough time for that client learner to respond in a way that's safe for everybody. We have to be, it's all about the timing and knowing your student, knowing what they're going to need from you at that time. Knowing them is key, because and that this is the thing that I said about touching on what you said about your student who doesn't like you talking to her on the approach to junctions. And I completely relate to her, because even now, as a driver of, well, it must be nearly 20 years, because I've just had my renewal for my driving licence, for my photo to expire, thank God. But even now, as a driver of nearly 20 years, a driving instructor of nearly 12, if you put me in a busy city centre, I'm a large town girl, so I've not had to do huge amounts of city centre driving. But if you put me in a city centre and I'm following a sat-nav, I can 100% guarantee the radio's getting switched off. And if you speak to me, you are not going to get a good response from me, because I can't do it. I need to concentrate on what I'm doing. And I really relate that to how our learner drivers are feeling when you're talking to them coming up to a junction. And it might be something that is just so simple for you to do, but they've got that level of concentration that they need to think, they need to process. So if you're not planning ahead to your surroundings, timing-wise, well, you then can't time or appropriately use the correct level of instruction with them that's going to work for them. You'll end up being reactive and jumping in and sort of having to say this and having to say that and having to say the other. And then they're more likely going to have a meltdown because they're trying to concentrate on this junction and you're chatting to them and everything's just going to be like, what's going to go on here?
Yeah.
And I completely relate to it because I still do it myself in a city centre.
I'm exactly the same. So exactly the same. However, this is where you're probably nicer than I am, because there's a big roundabout in Leeds, and I've now forgotten the name of it, but it's up by one of the test centres, and you're almost guaranteed to go on it if you go on your test. Mm-hmm. And when we go onto that roundabout on a lesson, when we first come onto it, the first thing I do is I ask the students a random question about what they're doing that day.
Absolutely. Yeah. Huge advocate for that at the right time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's not the first time they're doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where this question comes in for me, with regards to, it's all about timing. It's about knowing them, the stage, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, what they've asked for with regards to your sort of level of intervention and instruction, and what level of intervention you need to give. And that's where that first question comes in of goals and needs. There's a difference between the goals and the needs. One of the things that we've recently started around here targets that sort of distracted driving. And what we're doing around with my school at the moment is we are getting groups of students together as a collective. At the minute, we're actually targeting students who have failed a first attempt at driving test. And we're targeting those people to give them extra training. We do it with all of them anyway, but we're kind of targeting more with these at the moment, in the fact that we're going to get 3 of them in the car, 2 in the back, 1 driving. We're going to have the radio on. We're going to hold conversations as a 4, and potentially also take them outside of the area that they predominantly learn to drive in, maybe into the next town or what have you. And it's to get that, that level of distracted driving in there, even more so than what we can do in lessons in preparation for the test in the first place. So yeah, I'm a huge advocate for that, and I do that too.
That's fascinating for me, what you've said there. I might have to get you back onto the driving business episode as well, to talk more about that. But one of the things I do around that is I'm on the border between Leeds and Bradford. Now, most of my work is in Leeds, admittedly, but if those students fail the first test, one of my suggestions is always, let's go drive around Bradford City Centre. Let's see how you get on there. I do it before the test as well sometimes, and you can just see their face drop. I'm like, you don't want to do it? They say, no, right now we're definitely doing it. If you don't want to do it, we're doing it. Okay, so do you want to leave us with one tip, one piece of advice that you would give to anyone with an upcoming standards check or part 3?
Yeah, I think my biggest tip would be to not prepare. In my experience with PDIs and standards check with ADIs, is that we can prepare too early for the topic that we're going to do. Now, for me, we shouldn't, if this is to be, there's obviously an element of planning. We're all going to do it. It's a test at the end of the day. We're all going to plan. You're all going to pick the student that you feel this is going to work with the most. But for me, I've had ADIs and PDIs ask me 6 weeks before their standards check or 6 weeks before their part 3, what topic should I do? Well, for me, you can't possibly know it at that stage, because how do you know what your learner needs in 6 weeks' time? So you may already have your student planned, or the one that you're more likely going to want to take with you, the one that you get on well, the one that you feel is going to answer your questions or question you. But try not to plan the actual lesson itself too far in advance. You can get yourself all caught up in, I'm going to do roundabouts and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And in actual fact, in fast forward 6 weeks when the test is actually happening, that actual goal isn't the right goal for your student. A lot of people fall down because the goal isn't necessary. It's not correct. It's either too easy or too hard for them. But I feel that a lot of that comes down to the fact that the instructor picked the topic 6 weeks previously, and it wasn't client-centered. It wasn't around what the learner needed at the time. For me, you're only probably going to start to be aware of what the needs and the goals of that learner driver is probably only 2 to 3 weeks before, depending on how many hours a week they have of lessons. So yes, plan. Don't just rock up on the day and, go with it. But try not to kind of plan too far in advance would be my thing, because you can get yourself all caught up in a net there.
I think that's brilliant advice, and it also means I'm going to tell a very brief story, so be warned. Because I can tie this to me massively, because I'm always better on a lesson when a student changes their mind. End of one lesson, we'll say, right, what are we doing next week? And then you kind of get an idea, and then we come to, I've been thinking. I'm like, excellent. What are you thinking? Yeah. And I get excited by that, and it's more fun because it gets creative. And I tie that slap bang into these podcasts. Started recording this. I said to you, I'll do a little intro. I'll ask you for your overall thoughts. I'll ask you who you'd take, and then we'll get into episode.
Yeah.
That's the extent of what you knew. Now, if you'd wanted to know more, I'd have happily told you. But from my perspective, all I've got is bullet points. And some of them I've ticked and some of them I haven't. Because if I just go through this using my bullet points, I'm not getting what you want across. Yeah. And these interviews always go better, when I talk about the things that you're more interested in. Not me, you. Because I'm going to get more out of you. And I think it's very, very similar with students. If you're doing what they want, they're going to be more engaged. And
absolutely.
And just briefly on that story, and I'm not going to tell anyone the episode, but you can probably work it out. The worst episode I've ever done, and hint, it was in season 3. They came in with a list of answers to questions that I hadn't given them. So there was a point when I asked a question, and they said, I'm not ready to answer that yet. You'll have to ask me that one later. I'm like, well, what's this about? Where's this going on? And then there were another time during the episode when they said, I'm not telling you that. I'm like, okay, why not? We'll find out later. But not like in a playful way, but they had this list. And at the end of the episode, they said to me, it was okay, but I think we should do another one where I give you the questions to ask me. I'm like, yeah, you're not coming back, I'm afraid. We're not doing that one.
The thing is, and this is a massive thing, exactly what you're saying between instructor and student, is that you're not working on your agenda. you're also not working fully on theirs. You're working as a pair. You should be working together, and they should be able to kind of just change that and flip it around at any point because that's their goals. We also have to manage their needs as well. So sometimes we need to kind of, bring down some expectations if we feel it's beyond what they're ready for. And we know we need to manage that, but that's a different competency for another day. But it's exactly what you've just said. You've got to be able to work together. You can't go in with a fixed agenda, because if you do, it's more likely going to fall down very quickly.
Yeah. And then final thing, you are clearly an excellent coach and you clearly have a lot of knowledge. And so I want you to do two things for us. I want you to tell us where people can find you if they want to get some wonderful Emma Cottington coaching. And that definitely should be trademarked. And also you mentioned before about getting more involved in well-being and that side of it. So if there's anything that you want to promote around that, this is your opportunity. Go and tell us how awesome you are.
Oh, well, I can't do that. I'm not very good at that part of tooting my own horn. But, coaching is massive for me. So coming up over the next sort of 6 to 12 months, you will start to see me a lot more from a coaching perspective. And that will be wrapped up in a lovely well-being, holistic mindfulness bow, should we say, because I'm a massive advocate. I think my coaching skills do come down to the 5 essential coaching skills. I'm a huge advocate for that. So for anybody who is looking for coaching or any more information on those things and how they can deliver those or become, that trainer and coach within their training, then I can be found on Facebook. Just as myself, as Emma Cottington. You can find my driving school page, which is Up Driving School. And I have also written a Learner Driver logbook, which can also be found on Facebook. So you can kind of get me down any of those channels.
Awesome. Links for all those will be in the show notes. Should people wait 6 to 12 months or should they get in touch with you now?
They can get in touch with me right now. My training's ongoing and has been for many years. I'm a huge advocate for learning all the time, but I'm in a position to start delivering coaching and training one-to-one right now. So they can come to me whenever they like.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us on this edition, the 7th edition of the Standards Check Checklist. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me once again.
So big thank you to Emma Cottington there for joining me on that edition of the Standards Check Checklist and this edition of the Instructor Podcast. As I mentioned previously, if you want access to all the other episodes of the Standard Check Checklist and the other shows like Being Better with Bob, Alternative Routes, Driving Business, all that kind of cool stuff, head over to www.theinstructorpodcast.com or use a link in the show notes, and for £10 a month you get all that awesome goodness. But I did promise you some reviews, and I love it when I get a nice review, so I'm going to share a couple. Now, these ones are from Facebook. They are from my Facebook page. Now, just a warning, not everyone can leave Facebook reviews, but these people have, so I will be sharing them. The first one is by Craig Preedy. Craig is also a premium member and a wonderful human being. And he says, I've listened to a few podcasts now aimed at the ADI, and they are okay, but this one is hands down the best by far. The range of topics discussed and guests is second to none. Even the topics that I thought wouldn't interest me have. There's a genuine warmth between the presenter and Terry and his guests, and you can tell Terry listens as his questions are always relevant. I'm a little bit addicted. I listen in the car between lessons or on headphones when I'm cooking or shopping. It's awesome. I love it so much. I signed up to the Patreon just to get an additional fix. Well, big thanks to Craig Preedy there. Really appreciate those kind words. And there is a wall between me and the guests because I like my guests. I don't want people on that I don't like. So I do think there is a warmth there. And a big thank you for the review and a big thank you to signing up for the Instructor Podcast Premium. Slightly shorter one this time, but I want to give it a shout out because I think it was my first review on Facebook, and it's by Michael Carr of Go Roadie. Michael simply says, "This podcast is brilliant for ADIs and PDIs, especially coming into the industry. Guests are high quality and offer real value." So big thank you to Michael Carr and Go Roadie there for sharing that review. Nice and succinct, but I think it actually gets the point. I do aim to bring value. And also a big thank you to Craig Preedy. And just a quick shout out to Craig because he has got a book out from B to A. It's one of the best driving instructor books I've read. I love it. It's nice and simple and gets to the point with some different views on topics. And if you want to find out more, you can join the Instructor Podcast Facebook group. And over there, you can go and catch a live video recording I did with Craig discussing that book from B to A. But that'll do for today. So big thank you to you guys for listening. Really appreciate it, especially if you've stayed to the end of the show. If you've stayed to the end, you're my favourite listeners. So I'm just going to say thank you and let you enjoy the rest of your day. Stay safe.
The Instructor Podcast with Terry Cook. Talking with leaders, innovators, experts and game changers about what drives them.